Lee?
Hello.
Okay, I just want to make sure I see everyone is here. Are we ready to go? Ms. Coe, are you available?
Yes, I am.
Okay, I'll just get my picture on here and we'll get started. I'd like to welcome everyone to the March 24th audit meeting. We have a pretty packed agenda, so I will do our attendance right now. Ms. Tolan?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Good evening. I should have said good evening, everybody. Ms. McLaughlin?
I'm here.
Perfect. And Ms. Sizemore Heiser, I think I saw your name as well. She may have dropped off with Blackboard. But Ms. Coe, I think she's trying to come back in. So I know she's here. She's just trying to get back in. Ms. Coe, I know that we have a very full agenda, and just so that everyone understands, we do have a hard stop, correct?
Yes, around 7:15.
Okay. We perhaps won't need that much time, but I just wanted everyone to know. We've got some pretty substantive things to discuss today, but we do have that limitation. So Ms. Coe, I'm going to give you an opportunity to introduce everyone, and we'll go ahead and get started.
Sure, thank you, Madam Chair. I also want to take this opportunity to welcome our citizen member, Mr. Dan Wacko. Dan, do you mind to try your mic a little bit?
Sure, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. And
Fantastic.
also welcome Clay as well as our citizen member.
Hi, Esther.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for joining us, and welcome everyone. So I also see Lee's Teams is here. Thank you for joining. I also want to take this opportunity to welcome my Office of Auditor General family who are here tonight. We have Joni, we have Paul, we have Chris, Danielle, and our audit intern, Luke Robinson, is also here as well because he would like to learn from the audit committee about the discussion. So welcome all here. As Karen mentioned, today we have a quite a packed agenda. At the same time, I would like to take a moment, to celebrate, the work that OAG has accomplished. As you can see, there are many different reports who are here. Our goal is to go through all of them, but just in case if we are running out of time, then we may need to move likely maybe the last two agenda items to the next meeting. But again, the goal is to go through all of them tonight. And also one thing before we start on item 2, as some of the veterans for the audit committee meetings, you may see that tonight we do not have the regular item to go through the internal audit status and also the OAG inquiry status. It's mainly because we want to have adequate time to go through all the reports. So we will resume the regular status reporting in the next meeting. So with that,
Ms. Coe, before you go on, I'd like to ask if anyone has their microphone on, to please turn it off because we're getting a little feedback. Thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Coe.
Thank you, Karen. So with that, I would like to hand the time to item number 2.1. Mr. Chris Elliott and Paul Hicks from my team will go through the report. We will do a brief presentation about the fidelity of implementation of school board actions, and then we would like to leave the majority of the time for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction, Esther. So as she mentioned, I'll spend the next few minutes summarizing our OAG's performance audit of the fidelity of implementation of school board actions. This audit was performed in accordance with the FY21 approved audit plan, and it covered school board actions as defined in this audit as of July 1, 2019 through November 12, 2020. And for next steps, it also includes responses through March 2nd, 2021. The objectives of this audit were to review and evaluate the processes used by FCPS management to track, respond to, and implement school board approved actions, and identify opportunities to improve existing processes, and also to determine the costs and resources to track, respond to, and implement school board approved actions. So during the audit, we looked at school board actions, including the motions and amendments and follow-on amendments approved by a majority vote at regular school board meetings, outcomes agreed to by consensus at school board forums, and next steps agreed to by consensus at school board work sessions. The processes to perform each of these functions varies by the action types. And on page 4 in the background section of the report, we included the table which identifies the purpose of each of the various action types. The background provides further info on the action types, as well as information related to the school board meetings and roles of the school board and division. We also perform benchmarking and research on school districts within the Commonwealth of Virginia, including the top 10 by size and neighboring jurisdictions, as well as jurisdictions in Maryland, to inquire about the use of governance software and communication protocols between the respective school board and district management. OAG found that 10 of 12 districts utilize board docs, which is also the same software FCPS utilizes to manage meeting documents and school board policies and district regulations. Additionally, we inquired about the use of a process such as next steps, and we were not able to identify any other school divisions which publicly tracked school board member requests similar to the process performed by FCPS. As a result of this audit, we identified 2 findings related to audit objective 1 and 1 finding related to objective 2, and we make a total of 6 recommendations. I'll start with finding 1, which begins on page 12 of the report. And this is related to the tracking and reporting of school board motions and forum topic consensus items. For both school board motions and forum topic consensus items, we were unable to determine the outcome of each discrete action because FCPS does not have a centralized tracking or reporting process in place to document and ensure all actions are seen to resolution when applicable in a clear and conspicuous manner. And while the details and voting results of school board motions and forum topics are documented in meeting minutes for each meeting or forum topic, there is no consistent process to later communicate the implementation progress or status of the motion or consensus item when applicable. As a result of this finding, we made 2 recommendations. Our first one is that FCPS management collaborate with the school board office to ensure that all school board motions and forum topic consensus items approved by a majority vote are tracked in a manner which is clear and conspicuous and includes relevant implementation progress or status when applicable. We also recommended that FCPS management collaborate with the school board members to ensure expectations and methods for responding to actions are clear, consistent, and well documented. Given that the school board is currently considering revisions to the governance manual, OAG further encourages FCPS management to provide related feedback to the school board members to further enhance action tracking and reporting. Our next finding, which begins on page 16, is related to next step tracking, reporting, and completion. So unlike the motions and forum topic items, the next steps are tracked and reported in a document that is housed within board docs. However, we found that it is not complete with all next step responses for either FY20 or FY 2021. Of the 694 next steps requested by the school board between July 1, 2019 and September 12, 2020, the next step reporting document on board docs indicated that FCPS management responded to 449 by March 2nd, 2021. For the remaining 245 next steps with no responses in board docs, 15 steps were associated with FY21 work sessions and remain outstanding, and 230 were from FY 2020. Of these 230 FY 2020 next steps, FCPS management compiled information which indicated that 187 were responded to in some manner, but were not ultimately recorded in board docs. As such, we are unable to determine whether the school board was provided a response for these. Additionally, while FCPS management is generally responsible for responding to school board member next steps, the next step tracking and reporting document is compiled and maintained by the school board office, which results in a cumbersome process which may be more effective if performed solely by FCPS management. As a result of this finding, we made 3 recommendations. Our first recommendation is that FCPS management provide responses to all future next steps or outstanding next steps with pending decisions, or provide justification for not responding to next steps. Second, FCPS management collaborate with the school board office to ensure that next step responses are complete and responded to timely, and consider taking ownership of compiling next step responses into one document for the school board office to maintain on board docs. And our last recommendation for this finding is that FCPS management consider documenting the related decision and decision date associated with next steps to ensure that next steps are responded to in a timely manner. Our third finding is related to the costs and resources associated with tracking, responding to, and implementing school board approved actions, and this begins on page 20. FCPS does not currently quantify or track the discrete costs and resources required to track, respond to, and implement school board approved actions. Therefore, we were unable to determine the costs and resources to perform these actions. While FCPS is not required to formally track these costs, due to the purpose and nature of each action type included within the scope of this audit, such as motions and amendments or next steps, the related costs and resources are likely to vary significantly between the different action types, and even within the actions of the same type, such as motions and follow-on motions. Our recommendation for FCPS management is to determine if there is a cost benefit to tracking the costs and resources associated with tracking, responding to, and implementing school board actions on an individual basis or in the aggregate. And if a cost benefit does exist, they should develop procedures to track, monitor, and report on costs as appropriate. Lastly, we offer one observation related to the school board's current discussions and considerations for revisions to the school board governance manual, including motions, meeting procedures, and the role of the meeting manager and next steps. OAG encourages the school board to utilize the results of this audit when considering the design and implementation of any additional checks and balances related to school board action oversight. Further, the school board should consider collaborating with the school board office to develop procedures surrounding information in the board docs library, which is an existing repository currently in use to organize information and materials by topic, but the board docs library may lack prescriptive guidance. FCPS management and the school board office concurred with the findings and recommendations included in this report. And as always, we appreciate the consultation, cooperation, and courtesies extended to us by management. And I know it was a busy time during this audit, so I'd just like to say thank you for all the support from everyone. And at this time, I'd like to open the door for any questions or discussion.
Thank you, sir. Okay, we're going to jump right into questions with Ms. McLaughlin.
Thank you, Ms. Keys-Gamarra. So I do appreciate that our Auditor General did call me yesterday to prepare me for this report, given the concerns I raised at the prior meeting, which was just even the time and scope of this report. I have to say that I look forward to hearing from the other audit committee members, including our 2 citizen members, because honestly, this is not what I thought this report would be at all. As I mentioned in the last meeting, I not only thought it was important that we have an accounting of the actual follow-on motions and other significant motions, not the next steps, but just an appendix that says, here's what the Office of the Auditor General actually identified in terms of those 649 we've looked at to see where the system's been responding to, although that might have been with the next steps. Where I'm going with this is this report, honestly, as a board member, I don't see any documentation of all the interviews that I greatly appreciate Chris Elliott and Paul had done as part of the initial scoping of this audit. But I absolutely think, as I shared with the Auditor General, the board as a body, the management team, and the public needs to see in this scope of just this time frame alone, and all the ways the board has given direction to the superintendent, what were those and what happened, and where we don't have any responses, even to the finding that there's no tracking on follow-on motions, so there's nothing to be able to report on, this is so deeply troubling. But the fact of the matter is, we have school board meeting minutes. It is not hard to have an appendix in this report, and I would ask everyone's consideration at a minimum that it needs to be an appendix. It needs to be listed out. We have that documentation. The public and the board need to understand how persistent and pervasive a problem this is, that when a board as the governing body gives a direction to the superintendent and his team, it's expected to be carried out. And so my initial sense, without hearing from all of you, is I don't feel that this report is complete. I don't think it reflects certainly my expectations and maybe others. It's a good first start, but this 25-page report is pretty much filled with just a lot of descriptions of what our board docs are, our governance manual is, not nearly an amount of analysis and findings and proactive steps that our OAG should be helping our board to sort through and figure this out. So I'm just unfortunately not very happy right now.
Thank you, Ms. McLaughlin. I see Ms. Tolan also has her hand up.
Yes, so a couple of things. One, even with the brevity of this report, I think that, looking at the findings that we have, it is, it shows very clearly that we don't have a system for doing this tracking. So, as Ms. McLaughlin mentioned, I forget the exact numbers of the 649, 400 some were taken care of and 200 some we don't know. So there's some tracking somewhere to get that information. It would be interesting to know, with that, following up with that, if we did have that type of appendix, what happened to the other 200 some that were not followed up on, or that, was it time, what were the reasons for not following up? But I think more and proactively, I still think that I need to use for meetings. I'm sure there are many other aspects of Word docs that we could.
Ms. Tolan, could you repeat what you said? You went out for a few seconds.
Sorry, my internet is bad. I was just saying, proactively, I think that there probably are many aspects of Word docs that we're not using that maybe could help us with tracking these types of things. And if that isn't a capability of Word docs, is there some other, there are many different kinds of documents, tracking mechanisms that are out there. Can we employ one of those effectively to follow all of these, the motions, et cetera, that need to be followed? I don't think it would be very hard to find software that would help us with that.
Ms. Cole, did you want to address that question?
Yes, but is it, Ms. Tolan, is it you have more thoughts? So sorry to cut you off.
No, that was really it. Just how do we move forward to make sure that we are, do we need to review the Word doc software and look for other software that we could use for tracking, or are there capabilities in Word docs we're not using? And then, trying to get at the what is happening to some of these things that are just kind of getting lost.
Got it. So, Madam Chair, may I respond to both, Ms. McLaughlin comments and Ms. Tolan comment?
Of course.
Thank you. So first of all, really appreciate for the candid feedback from, from Megan And I would like to address that a little bit, right? And of course, I hope that this report will set up, a good stage as a first step, like she said, that to really analyze this challenge that we have. And I just want to draw everyone's, back to the original scope of work, right? And I think as an auditor that this is something that we would like to go with. And of course that the audit committee and then also the school board can request my office to conduct further work, to meet or to any other, unmet expectations in this report, we can always explore and do more work. So I just want to address, to Megan's comments earlier that we can do that. And at the same time, though, I would like to draw everyone's back, to the original, or to the review's objective. That is to review and evaluate the processes used by FCPS management to track, respond to and implement school board actions, and then identify opportunities to improve the existing process. So that's why in this report, we actually spend a lot of time to really understand how the process works, and then to see if there are any opportunities to enhance the checks and balances and to make this process, flow better and have control points. Then the second objective is to determine the costs and resources to do accordingly. So I just want to draw we all back, to this, objective that were discussed with the audit committee, and then also subsequently we kind of approved by the school board. And then if I may then circle back to Ms. Tolan comments about bot docs. And maybe this is a place that I would need, Chris, your help. But I think he actually, when he summarized the results for us, we actually confirmed that many of the other school districts are also using bot docs. Does it mean that bot docs is perfect and we should stick with it? Of course not. But I just want to say that from what we interview and ask the other school districts, it seems that this is a tool that many other school districts are using. Maybe Eileen, you can chime in if we are doing another RFP to look for another product, or if there's any development over that particular point.
We are currently doing an RFP to look for another project, and the reason that the other school divisions in Virginia use board docs is because VSBA has an exclusive contract. So when you pay for board docs, you're actually paying VSBA. So we'll be looking for an alternate software. Board docs doesn't have all the capabilities that we need. I believe the contract ends at the end of this year.
Thank you. Did I lose you guys?
No, I can hear you. Thank you.
Oh, okay, I wasn't sure if we were, it got so quiet there. All right, Ms. Cole, were you finished?
Yes, I am, yes. Unless if, I
Okay.
don't know, Chris, sorry, Madam Chair, Chris, do you have any other thoughts to add about the bot doc usage?
No, I think you covered it up there nicely. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Back to you, Karen.
Okay, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser?
Thank you. I'm having internet issues also, and I see my connection is red, so I just want to make sure you guys can hear me first before I continue.
We can hear you.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate this report, and I understand the frustration. I think, a lot of us are looking to, when we have our next steps, is lots of information the board wants, lots of information the board feels that, we need in order to make a decision to move forward. And so sort of having that kind of go and then coming back in this way that I think the report identified is not as maybe as helpful to track what we asked and the answer that came back in a way that is the most efficient. But I think, seeing this report, and I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Coe, it doesn't seem like this was in the scope of the report, was really, what are the ways to improve this process, right? Like one of the things that I think is an issue is that the governance manual says the next steps should be related to a decision the board needs to make. So I think there's room to improve the process from the decision tracking aspect. What's the decision? When does it need to be made? And what are the next step responses? But it seems to me that perhaps, I'm not going to get to this, perhaps there's a need for additional audit to come back with some of these recommendations, if that's appropriate for the audit committee, around how do we get consensus? How do we analyze the next steps to make sure they're needed for a decision? And then how do we prioritize them in terms of timeliness, as well as sort of relevance to the decision that needs to be made. So Ms. Coe, I don't know if you can comment as to whether that would be an appropriate sort of next action, or whether we need to, whether that was within the scope of this one or not.
Thank you, Rashna. Thank you. Maybe before I start sharing my thoughts, Chris, do you mind to share about like our recommendations? Do we have related recommendations that are addressing to Rashna's concern, which I think is super relevant, because so what afterwards, right? We identify that this is like, we got for the next steps component, that there are a lot, and how to prioritize and how to document the decision-making process.
Sure. Yeah, I can I think I could reference towards, let's see, recommendation 5, which is where FCPS management considered documenting the related decision and decision date associated with next steps. And I think that was our intent there, was to show what the decision is, as well as the decision date, to ensure that they're responded to timely. Thanks.
Right. Then how about the linking back to the decisions, right, for the school board to make? And I think, Rashna, this is an area that of course OAG is welcome, to take this on. But at the same time, we will need to collaborate with the school board members more, right? That because I'm sure a lot of the questions asked maybe in the follow-on motions, I think that those are more formal through the school board meetings format, and then also the next step through work sessions. So how about to really think about a analyzing framework, right? That will be something that we would need to work closely with the school board on. But I think that it will be something that we can help, OAG can help to evaluate that.
Great,
May not be this. Yeah.
I didn't mean to cut you off. I apologize. I thought you were. Did you have one more to add, Ms. Coe? I have just a comment on what you just shared.
No, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think I understand where Megan's comments are coming from, because it does feel to me that this is incomplete, and I hear what you're saying, Ms. Coe. I don't think it's incomplete in terms of the scope of what you were asked to do, but it feels like this is maybe incomplete's the wrong word. Maybe this is a step, and there's more steps that are needed to sort of get to, I think, what we all were trying to get to, which is we as a board are trying to get information to help inform our decisions, and we don't feel like maybe there's a better process. So I guess I would posit that if there's a next step to this report or this particular audit action, that it would be around determining a framework for next steps from how they're determined, how the consensus is built, the relevance to a board decision, the timeliness by which a response is needed, and then a initial response from staff regarding scope of the next step, whether they can respond in a timely manner or not, or any clarification is needed, like that. There should be, right now, the next step happens, we get board consensus, and it kind of goes into the ether. I think there needs to be a step in between there where there's some response immediate from staff saying, all right, we got this, we know this is for a decision that's on X date, so therefore we'll have this timeline in place, right? And then if there's questions or clarifications needed, that needs to happen at this phase as well. So I'm just saying, I'm trying to figure out, is there a mechanism for this committee to sort of help work with board and staff and our board's office to come up with this mechanism? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Like, how do we take this information we have here and build that process out?
I'm not Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, I would say at this point, if we could maybe, I'm not sure if Ms. Coe wants to respond to that. It may not be within the scope per se, but as we have a discussion, I think that we may come up with some suggestions on how to address some of the things that you mentioned. Ms. Coe,
I apologize, Madam Chair. That's what I was trying to say. I didn't know if it was the scope of her work or this report, but it seems like that's the natural next steps. I apologize for interrupting.
Right. I understand. I just want to make sure, were those your final comments, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser?
Yeah, I may have others later as I listen to my colleagues, but for right now, that's my final comments. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Code, did you have an additional response before I take an opportunity, and then we'll have go backs for each board member?
No, I actually think that what Rachna mentioned makes a lot of sense, and I think like Chris mentioned that one of the recommendations that we put into the report that is leading to that outcomes that the management could work with the school board and then to really develop a framework to further assist that process. So thank you for the opportunity. I think this is a very worth doing recommendation to develop further.
Okay, thank you. So I'll try to maybe summarize where I think we are, and
Madam Chair, Ms. Kismara?
yeah.
Oh, I didn't mean
I
to
wanted to
interrupt.
take a
I want to
turn.
make sure you see that Clay Hale has.
Oh, I'm
his hand.
sorry. Clay, did you want, Mr. Hale, did you want to speak? Clay, did you want to speak?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
So I think this just reinforces the read the scope message that we talked about last time. Megan did not have the benefit of being here during the scope discussion, but I know from past experience, she reads them very closely. So that's the opportunity to do this. I think the audit report has clearly identified a problem, and management owns the solution. And clearly they're going to have to work with the school board. So Ragnar, that's where the recommendation for the improvement belongs, with the management working with the school board. And to Megan's point, I think it's absolutely reasonable for the audit committee to ask for a list of each one of the activities that was supposed to be followed up on and those that were not. I think that's something that I bet Chris probably can pull that together pretty quickly, and that's a very reasonable follow-up request. So that's all I had.
Thank you, Mr. Hale. That's actually a great segue to what I wanted to mention, because overall, I think this really points out where there may be a disconnect for our ability to, for the community to see what we're doing because of some of the deficits that this particular report is bringing forward. And so I think it touches upon our ability to be transparent, and also the level of accountability that we are able to fulfill to our constituents as a result of not having the responses. And so I agree with my colleagues that this is painful as a board member, because our goal is always to, exercise due diligence, and we want information available to the public in a user-friendly way. And what this says overall is that we're not quite there. And so this is good in the sense of investigating that. But as Ms. Sizemore-Heiser mentioned, how do we get to the solution? The first question I'd like to ask with respect to that is, were we able to identify what other districts may be doing to perhaps track and keep a better record that is accessible to the public? Or did we see a better example as we looked at other districts?
I can answer to that. And as far as we know, we did not find any kind of public reporting of. It's similar where follow-on or motions are documented in meeting minutes, but we didn't see any kind of reporting document per se to necessarily follow up.
Okay. Because for me personally, I think this expresses why we've heard a number of board members express frustration. So the question is, how do we address it? I'm not sure, and I'd love to hear from my colleagues. I'm not sure that coming up with a better mechanism is the role of the audit committee. And I'm wondering if this is the results of this or some follow-up of discussion for us in terms of identifying is something that we may need to bring to the whole board for possible discussion as in a work session. And I would also like to see if we can get, and if, forgive me, I'm not remembering the scope very well, but it would be helpful, I think, if there were some guidelines specifically with respect to how staff might be able to work with us. Because one of the concerns in having these types of discussions in the past has been that when we get direction from staff, it can also end up limiting the board's ability to ask questions or to, it limits what we feel we can do because the answer from staff may be, but we can't give you that. So there's always a little tension there. And I'm just wondering if there are any recommendations on how to achieve that level of coordination that I think we're all looking for.
Madam Chair, I saw that Dr. Brabrand raised his hands. Maybe he has some ideas. And also maybe Eileen, from a school board office standpoint, maybe they have seen some other school districts about how do they do that publicly. Maybe they can contribute as well.
Now my camera's off. Okay. Dr. Brabrand, did you want to comment?
Thanks, Ms. Keys-Gamarra. I'd love to follow up on that last statement, and I do think this is a topic to share a little bit here, and we can maybe even share a little bit more at governance, and staff does want to get to solutions. Of course, we had our management response about, we recognize there have been next steps, gaps in all the next steps that have been asked out, and in the tracking, and we could work on the tracking. But I also want to be candid with all of the board members and, of course, our community representatives around this, that management owns this. I want to just say, I think one of the first fundamental things that we need to look at is defining the problem. And I do want to note that this audit report says the problem of next steps is not a problem other school districts have because they don't have these next steps. In 15 months, we had 700 next steps. That's about 50 a month. And I think we've got to look at the governance piece that Ms. Sizemore-Heiser said about having the next steps process be directly tied to a school board vote or to a decision. And I wonder whether, honestly, is the next step process, which has been through several administrations and through this administration, through my administration as superintendent, is it serving the board well? Is it serving the superintendent well and the community well, most of all? And we want to work with you and be collaborative, but I think what we've created is something, a workload, a system that no one else has, and we're not doing a very good job of it. And I wonder of whether the issue of votes and follow-on motions that do direct the superintendent that are tracked are part of how we can get closer to what I think the governance process is, which is giving you what you need to make a decision or have a vote, and doing it in a very timely manner, not months later, where the board is frustrated and the staff feels simply overwhelmed in the number of next steps it has to complete. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Brabrand. I did want to respond to that because when I think about the next steps that I know I have put forward, and I understand we may need to trim some things, a lot of the next steps arise because the information that has been received may not be flushed out, or at least from the board members' perspective, to the extent that they feel that would be necessary. So, I know in Return to School, for example, there were questions about, well, are we going to have the PPE and how can we assure people of their availability, et cetera, and so those kinds of questions oftentimes were the result of information not being presented at the work session. So I really, I'd love to hear my colleagues on this. I'm thinking that there's going to have to be some discussion with the full board with respect to, I'm wondering, Dr. Braybrand, if some of this could be addressed in better preparation before we have that work session.
Yes.
So that some of those questions can be asked, like I always try to do in my preparation, right? And we've had that time together, and I try to pull out what my fellow board members may want.
Yes.
But only the meeting managers get that opportunity.
Yeah.
And perhaps that's not enough.
And Ms. Keys-Gamarra, and I promise I'll stop talking and
No, you're fine. You're fine.
You've just hit something I absolutely want to say. One of the things we are working on with the current chair and vice chair, and hopefully you're seeing some progress, is to create a more standard template for our presentations so that we front load our presentations with the information the board wants and needs to make a decision, make those slides actually smaller, and then have a narrative report that accompanies the slides. So the overview and executive summaries in the slides, those slides have a standard format for every presentation that's the same. And maybe we can help create a meeting manager checklist so that in the meeting manager meeting, whoever's doing it is making sure those pieces are in there, and that administration and staff do a better job of giving what the board needs up front. So there's actually less demand on the backside for those next steps. And we'll be glad, and I would be eager to work with you all in governance or any other place to continue to tweak that formatting of the presentation and perhaps a meeting manager checklist. Thanks.
So if I may, just because I had another experience, and I promise I will be quiet and allow my colleagues to speak after this, but I noticed quite a different process when I was a planning commissioner. And the Board of Supervisors had their staff members working together, getting their questions through the process prior to public presentation. And I'm wondering if we need to perhaps consider that so that the work is being done prior to that meeting, right?
Yes.
And it feels, and people have an opportunity to ask questions, etc. And so I don't think this is specifically within the scope of the audit committee, but
Right.
we may be able to, the audit committee may want to, and I'm throwing this out for my colleagues, I see everybody has their hands up, we may want to have a follow-up meeting as an audit committee with our Auditor General as well as our community folks to come up with some framework to perhaps hone the discussion on behalf of the board as a result of this audit. And so I'm thinking perhaps a work session is necessary. I'm thinking perhaps a follow-up meeting for this audit committee to do that. And I just open the floor up to the rest of the folks to maybe comment on that or to make other suggestions, because I really do believe, Dr. Braybrand, this is where the rubber meets the road. This is where so much of, perhaps your frustration has been, staff members' frustration has been, certainly board members. And getting this right, I think will perhaps lower everyone's stress level.
Yes.
Okay. So
I agree. I like your approach. Thank you.
Uh-huh. Ms. McLaughlin?
Yes, I was going to suggest perhaps as well that we take the document down and we at least benefit from seeing one another a little bit better. That would be my suggestion. I'm going to really reinforce something that I said in the beginning. This report, I do not believe, respectfully, Ms. Coe, that it actually even fulfills the original objective. When you read what the objective was, this report itself did not even provide us with a listing of the board motions, follow-on motions, and forums to be able to say what took place in that scope of time. We do have that for next steps. And so both Ms. Tolan and I and others were referencing the 649, the 245, the 230. I mean, we got all those numbers on next steps. And as a side note, I agree very much with our superintendent. The next steps are burdensome and we have to work on that. However, I'm going to very much pivot from what I said at the last audit committee meeting, which these next steps were going to end up being the distraction from the bigger problem here. And Scott, I know you're committed to working with us and your team, and that means a lot to me as someone who spent 9 years on this board, and this is a 9-year problem. But what I don't like about this report, and I would beg my audit committee members to not accept the report at this time, is it is incomplete. It does not speak to specifically where we're talking about the problems are with follow-on motions. Page 13 is the most damaging part of this entire report, and it's a very de minimis capturing at the very end when it says cause. And it says school board motions and follow-on motions are in the meeting minutes, but there's no centralized tracking of their status. FCPS does not have supporting documentation or processes in place to document and communicate the completion of these motions and form topics that are outcomes of it. That's at the heart of this report. But Ms. Coe, your report doesn't even tell us what was that number in this very finite scope of time, which you know I've made the case it should have been broader. But this report has got to document this for the board, the public to understand how many times did this board think that it sat there in a formal meeting, whether a forum topic meeting or an actual business meeting. We voted, formally voted to the superintendent's point, and still management has no tracking, no reporting. If they don't have a process for tracking when we give them a forum, all right, when we give them, let's go with the follow-on motion, which I also cited in the last meeting on school nursing, why are we even wasting the board's time, the public's time, staff time to vote and approve a follow-on motion, which is a formalized directive to the superintendent, and management team has now confessed there's no process to take it up, track it, act on it, and report back. And I'll respectfully share something else I said in yesterday's meeting. Even if there's no actual electronic tracking of these follow-on motions, I am hard pressed to believe that the superintendent and his senior team, if you're telling me that every time we gave them a follow-on motion, they did nothing with it, then the real answer of this report should have been, we don't have electronic documentation of it, but to the point made on next steps, they gathered documentation and said, we did do work on this, but we're not sure how we reported it back to the board. That's actually not nearly as egregious as that you're all telling me in this report that you've got zero information, zero documentation that staff did anything on these follow-on motions. I hope my fellow colleagues understand how shocking and troubling that is. It takes a lot of work to get 7+ board members to give a formal directive to the superintendent on a follow-on motion, and this report does not talk about it. It practically ignores a problem. And the next steps are the least of a board's problem and the least of our concerns. Those are information seeking. You've got a board through accountability that directed the superintendent staff to do something, and your report doesn't even capture that problem. It almost makes it seem like, oh, well, they don't have it. I will also ask Chris, I would really like to understand.
Ms. McLaughlin, for 1 second, before you change that, before you go to the next topic, I really want to capture what you just said as a potential topic for the follow-on of this audit committee. And I don't know if you want to pull it from that language or who is here, Ms. Madiha, maybe we can. I just think that what you just said, Ms. McLaughlin, is one of the things I want to make sure we get feedback from our fellow audit committee members on, because as you say that, it really is the crux of what I think we're trying to get to. And Dr. Brabrand, I know you're hearing us. The next steps is one issue. Those are the informational things, but these are those matters where we have voted and we need to be accountable. not just with staff, but this is how the community knows what we're doing
Sure.
with our resources. And so, Ms. McLaughlin, would you mind putting that into some language for us so we can use it as a possible, when we go forward on what our decision-making point is from here? I want everybody to be focused on that as a potential objective for follow-up for this audit committee.
Oh, yeah, I can do that. I would like to still hear from
Sure, of
our
course.
auditor first, because I do want to make sure, Ms. Coe, you and your team know, I am not an auditor. So that's why I'm so glad we have Clay and Dan on this to provide their professional expertise in this arena. But I would like to hear from you on behalf of your team. Help me understand how I'm supposed to feel that this report fulfills that directive, which is that the report doesn't even tell us what you tracked. The scope of your work isn't even listed here. How many follow-on motions were approved during this time? How many forums topics were approved during this time? So that I know you can tell us there's no process, but that wasn't the purpose of this report. This was to identify the fidelity. And Dr. Braber and his team can certainly tell you, while they didn't document electronically, you could have given them a list and said, for every one of these follow-on motions, every one of these forum topics, what, if anything, did you all do with it? And that could have been in this report. Instead, it's just like, we don't even know a tabulation of the number. That you did provide tabulation on next steps at a minimum. Please help me understand why that wasn't done. And please help me understand why you all as a team didn't at least try to understand, when you talk about fidelity of implementation, it's not the electronic documentation. It's, did they do anything with those directives? That's not in this report. And I think that's a significant piece that's missing. So again, I don't know if it's Chris or Esther to speak to this, but I'd like to know if I'm just having an unreasonable expectation here.
I would just add that.
Chris,
Sorry,
may
go ahead,
I start first? Actually, sorry, I forgot to unmute. I've been talking to myself. Madam Chair, may I go first?
Karen, are you with us?
I am here. I'm sorry.
Oh.
I got distracted with, so I'm sorry.
Thank you. Yeah,
ahead,
I just want to
Esther.
say, if I may start. So thank you, Megan. I mean, I think first of all, I just want to say it out here publicly, right? That I think in addition to our citizen members, that many of the OAG members are actually certified public accountants, right? Like me, I have been in this field working for 20 years already. Chris as well is also a CPA, and many other, colleagues of mine in the office has a lot of different experience in auditing. Of course, that my past 4 years have been with FCPS. So we always treasure, Clay and Dan's industry experts too. But I just want to highlight that for the board itself, we actually have a lot of good resources in-house already. So, and at the same time, and I apologize, right? If kind of what we have on finding number one doesn't really hit home on what Megan and some other audit committees members are looking for. I believe the reason why, and Chris, you can help me to expand that further about why there's not a list attached, an appendix, because we really see our role as an independent auditor, right? If I start compiling things, then we are taking up some of the management role. And again, Megan, I saw you are shaking your heads. I'm thinking this is different perspective. But
no, Ms. Coe, just to make sure, maybe
may I finish?
Ms. Coe, I want to make sure if I wasn't clear. What I said is you did tabulate all of the next steps that fell within this time frame. There's no tabulation of how many follow-on motions and forum topics were during the scope of this time to even know whether they got answered or not. But we don't even know how many there were. But you did tabulate next steps. Why didn't that happen for follow-on motions and forums? That's the crux of my question.
Got it. Thank you, Megan, for explaining that. So the next steps, they are actually available publicly. So it's already populated. Chris, do you mind to correct me if I'm wrong?
Sure. Yeah.
And maybe you can able to better, respond to the Megan specific questions.
Yeah, and just to give a little more context, the reason we included the tabulation of the next step numbers is because that number is essentially determined by the school board office and management through the next step document. So that document is available. It includes all the next steps in one spot with the school board motions and follow-on motions. That would require us to go tabulate that ourselves because that document's not there. And that requires going through meeting minutes for each individual meeting rather than looking at one document such as the next steps document.
So meaning that for next step is kind of like a prepared by client document. And then I think Clay and Dan, you may be able to share more of your industry, insight, right? We can certainly include the public document, Megan, as an appendix, not a problem at all for next steps. We can find that very easily and it's available publicly. The thing is with the follow-on motions, and I 100% agree with you, those are even more of greater significance because you need to get the majority of the board to agree, to move forward on a topic, and those are not tabulated. So for us, we would need to go through each one of them to see some of them actually may not be actionable. Some of them, of course, are actionable, like the one that you raised last time for the school nurses. That definitely is a key initiative, and we are not trying to diminish that. No, not at all. But I just want to share some of the fine determination between that. And if the audit committee think that it is something we should start, and I think we can put it on as a recommendations to the management, and management can put that together, tabulated that together, and then Chris can validate that, right? So is this something doable, Chris, you think, with this approach?
I think that approach sounds doable. Yeah, like you said, it's hard for us to determine what may be actionable in some instances versus what may not be actionable in all instances. So I think that would be a good approach to have management compilate that for us and then us validate it.
So with that, that's all I would like to comment on. Thank you.
Ms. McLaughlin, did you have a follow-up?
I think it's just remains troubling to me that essentially, and Chris's response was extremely helpful. And Chris, I know your bandwidth is very tight, so I'm not expecting you to do things that management should have done in the first place. But I can't tell you how disappointing it is to me as a board member to find out that our system at the superintendent level, that they don't even have a document to produce for our audit office. What are the number of follow-on motions and other directives from the scope of time that you all selected, and they couldn't produce anything for you. So it would require you guys going into every single one of our business meetings and forum meetings to create a working chart. This is a really bad revelation, I have to say. I did not expect to hear this, and certainly not after 9 years. I want our Auditor General to know, I continually say how much I respect you and your team, respect the work you do. I definitely look forward to an offline conversation of maybe what I, as a layperson, would like to see in audit reports and what are there professionally. But I do hope you understand I'm coming from a place of just wanting us to have substantive reports that capture, significant information. And the outstanding question I just had is, how would an audit report like this have captured the really hard work that Chris did, and it's not in there, which is the school districts that he went to benchmark, the countless interviews that he and Paul did with board members. I mean, none of it's here. There's so much wealth of knowledge that Chris and Paul captured, and the board members, we aren't even benefiting from any feedback in this report at all that's saying, here's what board members cited as the problem to the scope of this work, or the problem they saw that speaks to this audit itself. None of it's there. And I would like to just understand how come there's no way that that's being captured there. We should at least have a list in the appendix of all the schools that were benchmarked. What did we actually do to find this information? Was it just we visited their website, or did we talk to any of them? Because Dr. Brabrand, please be careful. We don't know that school divisions don't have next step processes unless Chris and Paul went and spoke to them. They say their boards never do give any next steps or direction out of a work session. Then it just might be it's called something differently, or that's not publicly published on their websites that Chris and his team could find. But that's very different from arriving at the pronouncement that your management team and prior management teams in FCPS are just suffering from a next steps process that's burdensome, which I would agree with you, as I said earlier. But I think we need to be careful of presuming that that their boards just don't do any of this kind of work. So Chris or Esther, can you explain, am I asking for something that isn't done in terms of at least somehow capturing all those interviews and the benchmarking piece? Because it's not in the report.
Sure. Maybe I can start, and if Chris, you can support me. And again, Megan, I really appreciate for all of your comments as always. As when we discussed yesterday, I think you always give a very different perspective, and then it's very insightful. So on behalf of OAG, I really appreciate for your feedback. In terms of, I think, what should be included in the appendix, right? Many times it is really we are determining that by seeing what will be supporting the findings and the results, then we will see what makes sense to be in. And we try to, limit the audit report pages instead of becoming a book, that layman person may not be able to go through them easily. And in terms of benchmarking, Chris, because sometimes actually when we ask other school districts, they may choose to want to not to reveal that identity. I don't know, is it the case here? But maybe Chris, you can talk further. If not, I think we can include an appendix at the back to share with the public about exactly which are the school districts that we received the responses from. But at this time, I would prefer the audit committee, would accept this report, the contents, right? Because if we're going to change the contents, I am afraid that may impact the independence, right? Of course, like we discussed earlier, and as Karen Keys-Kamara suggested, that we can always, have an appendix to this report to look at a follow-on to the report, right? But I will urge the audit committee, to accept this report, and then we can include the appendix, which makes sense to include. So with that, Chris, you want to go ahead and share about the benchmarking information?
Sure, thanks, Esther. And I would say we did request interviews with all the jurisdictions. We didn't necessarily speak to all of them, but we did speak to quite a few, and I don't have the exact numbers in front of me. And I think I mentioned this in the report that we weren't able to identify a publicly tracked next step process. But that's not to say that school board members in other jurisdictions don't need information. So I think it's safe to say that there's still maybe behind the scenes or other processes in place. They're just not similar to how FCPS is doing it in a publicly tracked document.
All right, thank you.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Yeah, I just want to say that I think this is really important, again, to the report itself, when our Auditor General wants us to accept it. But I'm concerned again on how do we accept a report that I don't know that it has all the information we should have had at a minimum. How can we be turning in a report that it doesn't tell us the number of schools that they contacted, the number of schools they spoke to, and what did we actually find from those schools? It's just referencing that we did it, but there's no evidence and no reporting on it. Respectfully, I'm not worried about the length of the report. This report is filled with a lot of just administrative descriptions of what the board does, what board docs does, what governance manual does. I mean, there's not a lot of findings and analysis in this report. So I know I'm just one voice, but
Okay,
she's
so let me get some clarification, Ms. McLaughlin, and then I want to ask Dr. Braybrand a question. Ms. Cole, is there a deadline on the board, the audit committee giving you some sort of feedback on what this, our response to this particular report?
So I do not think there is a deadline, Chair, but I do have a concern about the independence piece. So
Okay.
normally when an audit report released and welcome everyone, the audit citizens to members to comment too, if there are clarifying questions, right? For example, including appendix, to further elaborate a point, we are happy to do that, to add additional kind of like colors to the key contents of the report. Very happy to do that. If
Ms. Cole, can I just clarify? If those kinds of clarifying questions, are you expecting that to happen before the report is accepted or after?
So the clarifying questions normally come during the audit committee meeting. Then
Okay.
I would take those clarifying questions and change one word here, one word there. Normally it's pretty minor. And then I normally shared it out with the whole audit committee again in a week time. And
Okay.
then I will post it for final.
Okay.
So that's kind of like the protocol we have been following. But again, those are clarifying questions, meaning that we have a certain points on the report already to clarify what it means. But if I hear Ms. McLaughlin correctly, it seems that she thinks that some of the key information that should be in the report is not in. Then that's a totally different, landscape and perspective. So I just want to highlight that if we are going to, revise this report, I'm really concerned about the independence of my office.
Okay, thank you. So just as I asked for patience with my other audit committee members. I'm just trying to clarify what we may need to do as committee members here. Dr. Braybrand, you heard a lot of discussion about the availability of information with respect to forum topics and motions, follow-on motions by board members. Can we get some clarification from you as to what information is available? Is it just informal by the staff, or is there some sort of record that, isn't included in this audit?
Yeah, I may have to bring Marty Smith in to answer that question. One thing I'll just say real quick before this whole process, and again, you're in a system, you don't know any different, but board docs can't track motions, can't track votes. I mean, that's amazing to hear. Like, it'd be great if we're going to get a new software group that the follow-on motions just automatically get put in, that the votes of school boards automatically get in. We've got minutes we're taking. There ought to be an automated way so we're not having to run back and rummage through all these board minutes. And I hope the next software system we get might be able to do that, even though I know that's not the scope of this audit group. But I wanted to just say that. And let me see, Marty, do we have it centralized or by department, some of the follow-on motions already collected by department?
So generally what happens with follow-on motions is if they're directed to a particular department, then that assistant superintendent would be responsible for the follow-on motion. And follow-on motions take a variety of shapes and forms. A follow-on motion could be to add something to the following year's budget. It could be to pull together a program or implement a particular initiative. And so because they do take so many different forms, we do not have that centralized approach. But we have in the past had approaches where that information has been pushed out to particular assistant superintendents. and they've followed up with the follow-on motion. But there hasn't been any process to go back to the school board office to say that this follow-on motion has been completed. It has generally been evident in some of the work if it's to produce or create something.
So amongst just one last clarifying question, and then I'll go to Ms. Tolan. So the staff, our leadership, is not having regular meetings or discussions about, well, there's been this motion, this is how we're handling that, and some centralized way, just within your leadership of how you're following up on board action.
No, so no, I wouldn't say that, if I may speak. What I would say
Sure,
is
of course.
that generally after a school board meeting, and if it's a work session or a school board meeting, we as a leadership team do have a discussion about follow-on motions, have a discussion about next steps, and then those items are then taken by the assistant superintendent and acted upon. So there is that discussion. We certainly do not simply hope that someone would do that work, but we do have that discussion as a leadership team.
But there's no record of it. Is that what I'm hearing? Is there a record that one can reference to say, this is where we are in terms of addressing particular board actions?
No, I do not have a record, and I'm not aware of any record that we keep of where we are with regard to addressing board actions.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Brabrand, you look like you might want to say something. If not, I'm going to go to Ms. Tolan. Okay, Ms. Tolan?
Mr. Worko has had his hand up for quite some time. I don't know.
Oh, I am so sorry. Mr. Worko? Daniel, did you still want, oh, he put his hand down, looks like. Did you want to speak, Mr. Worko? Okay. Unfortunately, we can't hear you.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay,
Yes.
Thank you. When I'm trying to boil this down in my own head, and it seems to come down to a couple of different things. The first is that in one way, the report itself, the audit report, did accomplish the objective in that it identified a problem or a series of problems that management needs to address, and that OIG will follow up on at a later date, just like they do with all the other issues. But I do want to focus on Megan's point, because I think that her questions all seem to revolve around just how big of a problem this is, and then trying to quantify that. And I myself am sort of curious on this, to second what my fellow citizen member Clay Hale said a while back, is that, focusing on an appendix, my question to Esther and her team, or what specific information could be presented. I mean, there is information in the audit work papers. Does OIG have an opinion as to about what additional information could be presented that would sort of hone in on how big of a problem this is, and what information can be shown that would essentially illustrate that? And then a question to Megan is, to get to a level of accepting the report, what additional information would you like to see? I mean, you've mentioned a lot, but is there something in general that would satisfy you to get to where the OIG could issue the report, the board could vote on that, that would quantify just how big of a problem this is?
Thank you, Mr. Worko. Ms. McLaughlin, I'm going to ask you if you can prepare to answer that question. I'm going to call on the other committee members and give you an opportunity to work on an answer to that question. Ms. Tolan? Thank you,
Yes.
Mr. Worko.
Yes, thank you. I'm happy to follow Mr. Worko too, because I think what I said earlier too, this report clearly identifies a problem. And the problem is, as Megan clearly pointed out, we got a little sidetracked talking about next steps at the beginning, but I mean, it's even a bigger issue for board motions and, follow on or forum topics. Just the fact that these actions are not being tracked in an efficient manner, so that we can easily check on them. I mean, I can't believe that there's not some way to easily automate this. I mean, even if I think about like the budget question procedure that we follow, you know, we send in budget questions to Lee. I mean, recently with another board member, we were curious as to where one of our budget questions was and sent Lee an email, and she replied, you know, very, very quickly, oh, that particular budget question is in the final review process. You know, it will be answered and available to you within a couple of days. I mean, and she had that answer to us like immediately. So, I mean, we're tracking all the budget questions very carefully. You know, maybe we need to use that same system. I mean, I don't understand why we're not tracking these other things. You know, and I do think that what we're dealing with is a symptom of also a much bigger issue, which we kind of get at, you know, even though some of the information that was in the report was just like right out of our governance manual, for example, I found it very helpful to see that because it talked about, for example, you know, the role of the meeting manager and, you know, how, you know, the upfront planning could help you manage some of these motions or next steps perhaps better. But it says in there that, for example, you know, the meeting manager should meet with the, you know, staff at least 2 weeks before the meeting. The meeting information will be posted, you know, 10 days before the meeting so that board members all had an opportunity to submit their questions to the meeting manager. And, you know, there would be this back and forth on putting together the meeting presentation. I mean, at least my experience over my, 15 months on the board is our time is nothing like that. You know, the meeting manager is meeting with staff, you know, 2 days, 1 day before the meeting, and then the documents put out there and we have the meeting in the next 24 hours at a maximum. So we've had that, you know, and I understand it's been COVID-19 and all of that, but, you know, those are all of those procedures I think, you know, Ms. Keys-Gamarra was talking about too, that we need to just really look at that overall process with meetings and information and the board having actions and asking questions and asking for more information, and may help us with, you know, just the sheer numbers of what we're talking about. Anyway, that was a long treatise there. You know, the bottom line here is that we need a tracking system that's efficient, that everybody knows where it is, the public can see it, the information is there, and it's easily accessible. I know, Ms. Wahlberg, you mentioned that we're looking for something to replace board docs because it's not giving us everything we need. Is this one of the things in particular that you see missing and that, you know, we'll be looking for?
Yeah, this is one of the things that a new system could provide. But honestly, putting together a spreadsheet and assigning or distributing it to LT after every meeting and saying this is when a response is due is not difficult. We can do that right away. I mean, the motions, Scott had said before, the motions are automatic. They're not. I'm actually putting them in and entering the vote in board docs. But it would be easy enough for us to go through like the past year and say list all the motions and all the amendments that were approved and then send that out and ask for follow-up.
Yeah, so I'm done. I'm with comments. I appreciate that, Ms. Smallberg. You know, that, and that's maybe something, if it's easy to do that, we should at a minimum start doing that. And then as we look at some of these new systems and ways to automate things, you know, maybe we pick a different solution. But, you know, I agree with what, you know, Clay Hale said at the very beginning of the meeting. Management owns the solution. You know, it's up to us now that we have this problem, not a surprise to me, given my experience, that has been identified. We need to figure out how to fix it.
Thank you, Ms. Tolan. So I'm taking that to, I'm noting your comment as an agreement that we need a tracking system for our forum topics and motions at a minimum. And I think I'm interpreting what you're saying correctly. I hope so, at least.
Yes, at a minimum. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, and then we'll go back to Ms. McClung. Oh, hold on one second. Raj. I think Dr. Brabrand has his hand up.
I do think just checking that in the report, our response said we would work on working to come up with this tracking system. And Eileen's making a suggestion. It feels like this could be a lot simpler than maybe we all think to start to do it, certainly going forward and to the best of our ability going backwards. Thanks.
I think it is simple. There's not that many of them. So I don't think it would be that hard.
Okay. Thank you guys so much. Ms. Sizemore-Heiser?
Thank you. I actually had the same question about tracking system. I mean, just a spreadsheet where after each meeting, maybe our clerk's office works with Dr. Brabrand, but, it's entered in a spreadsheet, and then Dr. Brabrand and his team, when they meet on it, they assign a leadership team member who can own it, similar to what Lee does with budget question, excuse me. So if a board member has a question about what happened with my follow-on motion, there's a spreadsheet that says this is the staff member to ask, and they own that process. Same with forum topics. So I guess I'm just puzzled that we haven't had this, and I'm glad we had this audit to flush that out. To Megan's point about, an appendix and more information, I hear what she's saying, and I agree. It would be nice to have more information. I'd like to have some idea of, next steps versus forum topics versus follow-on motions, because I do feel like there is a difference between those in terms of consensus and stature, for lack of a better word, and that's not quite the right word. And I don't know that I appreciate the point about what could we do that wouldn't be too burdensome, but would give a little more information. But I do think we need to have an idea of where things have gone with that. And I actually think, frankly, in the next steps document, there could be, we're doing it, if there's a spreadsheet now, we could just assign who the LT member is or write that in there. So that way we know who to follow up with on there. So I think that same process could apply. The other point I wanted to make, and I agree, is that if we do more work before the work sessions, perhaps there'll be fewer next steps afterwards. But I wanted to point out, the first time I was a meeting manager, I actually read in the governance manual and on board docs, and it said that the presentation should be available 2 weeks ahead of time in meetings with the meeting managers, and then meeting managers talk to colleagues to get their questions. So I'm wondering if, I know with this year's been crazy, but I'm wondering if there's a way that we can do more of 2x2s, use the meeting manager roles to gather some of those board member questions earlier to help inform the work a little bit better. And I just was wondering, is there some sort of process we can put in place that's a little bit easier to follow to gather that information ahead of time?
Dr. Brabrand or Mr. Smith, do either of you want to respond? I do think, go ahead, Dr. Brabrand.
I would just say, we've said in this report that we'll work with the school board office to come up with a better tracking system. So I don't know what the actual answer is tonight, but I know we can work on it and come up with something in short order, and we need to.
And I would just caution, I think this is a wonderful discussion. Because it may be a little outside of the scope of the audit committee, I hesitate to resolve the issue without the board being aware. So I am thinking that I will give a thorough report when we have our board meeting, so that our board members know that we've talked about this, but also let our chair know that we may need to have some follow-up. But I'm certainly happy to hear how our other audit committee members want to speak to that. Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, did you have more?
Yeah, I want to kind of go back to the report itself, and maybe ask Ms. Coe, in terms of the scope and the work as you see it of the audit committee, I just want to understand the thinking around the amount of information that was presented to answer the scope of the because I do think it would be useful to have it broken down a little bit more, but I also hear what you're saying of the amount of work it would take to go back through all of it. So I guess I'd want to hear a little bit more about how did we get to just sort of the amount of detail given, what the scope was and what we were trying to achieve with this.
So if I may, go ahead.
Yes, please.
Thank you. So I think in terms of like, you know, the appendix, if I hear, I keep on taking notes during this conversation that the next steps document we can include very easily because that is publicly available. Then the second item about the follow-on motions and then also from the foreign topics discussion, any school board actions that recommend the management to do, that I would need management or the school board office to take stock. And then we will review them and ensure that you know, actually in the report, we did not really say that because that was not keeping track of. And I hope you all could understand, you know, that dynamics. And we can include that as an appendix and say that is provided by management, right? So we can include both as appendix behind the report. And in terms of benchmarking, we actually included that in the report. I think if I have the right page number, maybe Chris can help me, but the page number I actually found is on page 9 of the report where we discuss the benchmarking about what we have done within the report. So I hope that the appendix of next steps and then which is available publicly, but also the documentation that management and school board office can put together related to the follow-on motions and also from the forums actions that can be included as an appendix as well.
Thank you. That was the extent of my questions.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser. I think we can, I know this is gone, and I warned Ms. Coe that this discussion might go long, and I know we have a hard stop. So I want to make sure we circle back to Ms. McLaughlin, because perhaps the most important thing is to figure out what our next steps will be, because, you know, I will, you know, certainly we really appreciate you, Ms. Coe, and your staff helping to identify, you know, it's sort of one of those things where we know we've been frustrated, but now we can say, that's why, right? Now we understand. And so we do need to hone what this audit committee needs to do next. I've got some notes, but I want to give Ms. McLaughlin an opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Ms. Keys-Gamarra. I know this entire meeting, everyone's indulged my lengthy concerns that I've cited here today. And I really appreciate Dan Warco's observations. It was very validating for where I sit right now. He'd asked the question if there's any, you know, missing information that is contained within the audit committee's working papers, working documents that simply just need to be included in this report, whether an appendix or otherwise, and that would give me comfort to sign off on this report. And I really reflected on, you know, what could get me there to sign and support this. But I went back and read the objective again, and I need to emphasize this. The objective was to review and evaluate the processes used by the management team to track, to respond, and to implement the approved actions. And while there's been a lot of conversation about there isn't an electronic tracking process, that is not what the objective was. The objective was for the audit committee, or for the audit shop, the OAG shop, to look at what are the processes they're using to do those 3 things I just said. Mr. Smith, our COO, said that they do have processes and how they handle our form topics and our follow-on motions. And while it's not electronically tracked, and that's the piece that this report is talking about, there is a process, whether they do it or not, in terms of responding to and implementing our actions. They do know which ones they've done and not done. That's not captured in this report. This report just says they couldn't find a tracking mechanism or a formal tracking mechanism. This was never about just tracking. It was actually taking the action and doing something with it. I think that is very much missing from this report. So for Ms. Coe's concern on the independence piece, I respect that. You need to do your audits the way you do it in independence. I will end with this. I don't think you filled the objective of this at all. I cannot ever accept the report in this current state. And even if I felt you met the objectives, which I don't believe you have, I respectfully would disagree that putting in your data in an appendix is not affecting the independence. And I will hope that your team will revisit that. What you have in your working papers, you should include in the appendix where needed, because it needs to round out what's cited in here, but you've got no evidence to speak of it, and it should be in your appendix at a minimum. So that's kind of where I'm at, Ms. Keys-Gamarra. I've never had to do this before. I feel bad about it, but there's no way I can sign off on this report. And I just appreciate where people have indulged me in my concerns today.
Okay, so I want to give Ms. Coe an opportunity to think a little bit about what you just said, and so I'll kind of do a segue here. As I said earlier, in reviewing the information with Ms. Coe last week, I was concerned that we had far too much on our agenda, because I knew this fidelity of implementation was a significant concern for the board. And getting to the core issues is really getting to the core, our core ability to be successful. And so what I'd like to do in just a few seconds is to give Ms. Coe an opportunity to give this committee her response. I know that she's concerned about her independence, and I believe everyone has expressed a desire to respect that. But I'm thinking there may be room here, Ms. Coe, for you to come back with some recommendations on how we might address some of the things that have been discussed today, because this is so central to the board and its ability to move forward. So, and I think that would probably be where my recommendation would be. You said earlier that there was not a timeline here, and I didn't hear any of our other audit committee members speak to the issue of approval, but I did hear a number of comments with respect to the need to track, the need to be able to identify how we're moving forward, having that additional information with respect to what work has been done, what other schools have been approached, what those questions were. And so I'm thinking that perhaps this may help us to come to a resolution as to be able to come up with not only reporting to the board, but also saying, what the audit committee can do to hand it off to the board, because obviously there is additional work that needs to be done. Ms. Coe, did I give you enough time to perhaps respond to Ms. McLaughlin?
Yes, sure. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, everyone. I think this report, actually, we did spend a lot of time on it, not just OAG, but also all the school board members, and then also, the superintendent office and the school board office. So we really would like to have, this report, fully address the objective of the audit. And I think I hear Ms. McLaughlin concerned about the fact that that is not just electronically tracked, but there must be, if I may use that word, like other systems that the CO office or superintendents are tracking them. However, during the audit, when we asked that question, the answer was no. So again, I would stand by the audit report. I do believe that what we have done fulfill the needs of the objective. And if I may also highlight here too that our office is complying with the government auditing standards. So we check all the the things that the GAO requested the audit teams to do. So I'm standing by the contents, and I do hear comments about adding additional appendix, and which, like I mentioned before, I'm very happy to include the next steps table, which is available publicly, and we can also work with the management, not necessarily work with, but also have requested the management and the school board office to tabulate the follow-on actions, and then also the school board actions from forums, and included them as an appendix. So to give the community members, more understanding about the scope of what we have been looking at. But I also want to say I do agree with each one of you. I hope that this report is the start, right, of revealing or of surfacing a challenge that we are all very passionate about, which is really important and critical for the work of the school board. And I hope that it is a start. And OAG would love to support and assist the school board, with another, expanded scope or like a new audit. I think that will be something that we will be very happy to do. For this report, I'm standing by the contents. I'm happy to add the appendix like I have mentioned. Thank you.
So, okay, thank you. To summarize, you would like to add an appendix of the work that has been done for next steps, but I didn't hear you, Ms. Coe, address the other two. There were two items that Ms. McLaughlin mentioned that were a part of the scope. And Ms. McLaughlin, can you give us those other two initiatives?
Yeah, I think Ms. Coe captured two. One was that our clerk can find the number of follow-on motions and forum topics that did occur during the scope of the study, and they need to be in the appendix listed out. What wasn't mentioned, the third one, you're having a great memory of. What I cited was a listing of the schools of which that the audit committee benchmarked their practices. And, I don't think listing out those schools should present any problem to them because it's not identifiable. The report doesn't even talk about any individual school saying this school district A, B, C, or D. It doesn't name any of them out, but we should be the public needs to know and the board needs to know. When we say we benchmarked what we're doing versus what other school divisions are doing, the OAG should be revealing what are those 12 schools they did. Otherwise, that is working documents that can't be verified. And I think that's reasonable.
Sure, Megan, and I'm so sorry I missed that point. Maybe may I request the clerk to put up the report again? So I'm sorry that we have been talking about it, and I just want to pull back the report and then focus on page 9 just to see if this is something that we already included in the report. So I just want to see if it will meet the audit committee members' expectation. Thank you. So I'm just using the light of speed to turn to page 9. Okay, hold on, here we go. Okay, one more page. So I hope you can all see that, and if it's too small, please use the magnifying glass to maximize it. Under benchmarking, we documented OAG benchmark and perform research on school districts within Virginia, and then it quote the size, how many of them, and then how many of them we're using Bob Docs to manage. So we did document the numbers here, and we can also go back. We will also go back and see if those public school districts allowed us to disclose their name, and if they do, we will certainly include an appendix to the report.
Okay.
I hope that it helps. Thank you.
Yeah, Ms. Coe, I think that's important for all of you who are certified auditors and certainly our citizens, that I'm the layperson. So again, I would never want you to do anything other than follow certified practices, which is, I do know when you interview, you have to sort of have certain protocols, but if it's allowed to list the names of them in the appendix, I would hope and expect to see that. But I do understand you have your own limitations I will still
Thank
say,
you.
I think this section on benchmarking lacks your working papers and the working information. I would have liked to have seen more detail in there.
Okay, so with those comments, Ms. Coe, would it be appropriate to bring back that appendix and any additional information you feel comfortable within your expertise to provide, so that perhaps we can approve this report at the next meeting?
Yeah, I will include them as appendix. I think the three that we talked about, and then I can bring it back to the audit committee.
Okay. So, Ms. Coe, I do recall that you have a hard stop, and I believe it was 7:15. So I will, I think that this was a very important discussion, but I know that we were not able to cover a number of things. I just want to make sure that none of my audit committee colleagues have any additional comments. But Ms. Coe, I will certainly allow you to, wrap us up so that you can meet the deadline that I know you have with your
Yeah.
family.
Yeah, thank you. So I do have one time sensitive matter, which is item
Okay.
number 3.1. So I think we discussed about this topic in the last meeting about the FY22 audit topics. And so last time, some of the audit committee members asked if I can provide more information about what would be my first pick. So I actually added some appendix to this document. So if the clerk can put up, so I can show that to all the audit committee member. And by showing it to you, it doesn't mean that we have to go through them tonight. No, I just want to share it in the audit committee format, and then I can send it off to all the school board members where they can also see the list of potential topics. Of course, that each year my office can only do maybe 6 to 8 of these topics, but I would like to start soliciting feedback from all the school board members as well as our audit committee citizen members. So with that, sorry that the font's a little bit small, so feel free to maximize it on your screen. So the first few pages are exactly the same as last time. I just add a column on the right where I would indicate to all the school board members and audit citizen members about you need to rate them. And this approach is the same as last few years. What I have included in this document, I will just go very quickly to the last few pages. I think it's slide 14 and then also slide 15. So here is what I included for the audit committee members and also the school board members to see is here are the list of topics that are not quite the primary audit topic from last fiscal year risk assessment, but they reached the secondary audit priority from fiscal year 21. So I would like to include them here for the reference for the school board members. And then the page after that, which is the last page of this document, which is page 15, also included the new emerging topics that were through benchmarking. We actually see a lot of these school districts are looking at those new potential audit topics. And I think there are quite a lot of them, and we included the numbers, how many school districts that we have seen. And then the last topic on this list is item number 41, which is the division-wide program management process. And it is one of the topics that I take stock from one of the school board work sessions. So I just want to go through it very briefly with the audit committee tonight, that I'm going to send out this very important information to all the school board members and also our citizen members so that we can all start our prioritization. And once I received all the insights and information back, I will put together my proposal, and then I will bring it back to the audit committee for discussion, and before we bring it to the school board for review and approval. So I just want to highlight this before we end this meeting. And then if I can also wrap up that we also have 2 other agenda items on the list, and I apologize, tonight we don't have the time to go through, which are some of the business process audit report, and then also our follow-up report, and we can certainly discuss that in our next meeting. So with that, I would like to hand it back to you, Madam Chair.
Yes, I just want to clarify with the information you just presented to us, you just wanted to let us know that this is a time-sensitive topic, that you will be sending it out to the board to seek comment. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Okay, so I just wanted to make sure our committee members understood that. I want to say goodnight, but I certainly want to make sure that I'm not seeing any hands, nobody has any questions before we go. I really appreciate the discussion tonight. Thank you guys so much. And Dr. Braybrand, thank you for being here. I know that, this is where the rubber meets the road kind of work. So
Yes.
With that, I
Thank you.
want to bid everyone a good night. And I thank you for being here. And thank you especially to our citizens who have given us such invaluable input. Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank
Good
you.
night, everybody.
Good night.
Thanks, Karen. Well done.